It's 3 a.m. You can't sleep. And somehow, your brain has picked tonight to bring back a memory from last summer. That guy selling fish on the corner, 45 degrees outside, the asphalt is basically a frying pan, and sitting right there on his cart, completely unbothered, is a block of ice that hasn't melted in hours. Meanwhile, the ice in your freezer at home turns into a puddle the second you leave it on the counter for 5 minutes. So what does this guy know that your freezer doesn't? Welcome back to StickHead. Let's find out. Before we get to the how, we need to answer a different question first. Where does that ice even come from? Because it's definitely not the same thing as home ice. Commercial ice, the kind sold to vendors, isn't just water frozen in a box. It's made in actual ice factories, using a completely different process than your freezer. And weirdly, that process is the first clue to why it survives so long. Most ice factories cool things down using ammonia gas, not the freon your fridge uses. Ammonia is cheaper and way more efficient for industrial-scale cooling. Here's the process. Liquid ammonia gets pumped through pipes, and those pipes run through massive tanks filled with salt water. Salt matters here. Salt water has a much lower freezing point than plain water, so the ammonia can cool it down to as low as -10 or -12 degrees Celsius without it turning solid. Now, here's the part that trips people up. That freezing cold salt water is not what becomes the ice. It's just the medium. Inside that ultra-cold salt water, workers submerge large rectangular metal containers filled with clean, fresh water. Those containers sit in the brine for over 12 hours, and the fresh water inside slowly freezes solid into massive ice blocks, usually weighing around 25 kilograms each. Once frozen, the blocks get dipped briefly into a second room-temperature water bath, just long enough to loosen the ice from the metal mold. Workers listen for a distinct cracking sound. That's the signal the block has separated and is ready to come out. And these blocks get delivered before sunrise, while it's still coolest outside. Okay, so now we know where the ice comes from. But that still doesn't explain how it survives an entire day of blazing heat with a street vendor. And the answer isn't magic. It's physics. Specifically, thermodynamics. These vendors have never taken a physics class in their life. But they've inherited a set of tricks, passed down for generations, that happen to be scientifically brilliant. Heat always moves from hot to cold. That's just how thermodynamics works. Leave a block of ice out in the open air, and the surrounding hot air will constantly attack it, transferring energy into the ice until it melts. Heat can reach the ice 3 ways. Conduction, direct contact with something hot. Convection, hot air circulating around it. And radiation, direct sunlight hitting it. A smart vendor fights all 3 at once. The first move is obvious once you think about it. Keep the sun off the ice completely. A big umbrella. Storing the block inside the cart itself, shield it from direct light. Simple. But it removes radiation from the equation entirely. This is where most of the real strategy happens. Isolating the ice from the hot air around it. Sawdust. One of the oldest, most effective insulators humans have ever used. Wood is naturally a poor conductor of heat, and when it's broken down into sawdust, it creates millions of tiny air pockets between each fragment. Trapped, still air is an incredible insulator, and just sits there, not moving, not transferring heat efficiently. Sawdust does something else too. It slowly absorbs the meltwater that forms around the ice. And that matters, because water pooling around ice actually speeds up melting. No water, no acceleration. Vendors who store ice on carts often line the bottom with sawdust and sprinkle more on top. And when it's time to use the ice, they just rinse the block off. This isn't a small effect either. In 1833, An American businessman named Frederick Tudor shipped massive ice blocks by sea from frozen American lakes all the way to India, the Caribbean, and Europe. No refrigeration, no electricity, and kept that ice intact for months. The method? Sawdust. Wet burlap. Vendors also wrap ice in damp burlap sacks, the same principle as evaporative cooling used in old clay water jugs. When burlap is lightly wet and exposed to air, the water evaporates, and evaporation actively cools whatever it's touching. As long as the ice stays wrapped in damp burlap, it keeps getting a constant passive cooling effect. Plus, the burlap blocks sunlight and slows hot air movement across the surface at the same time. Styrofoam, the modern upgrade. Styrofoam is over 95% trapped air inside tiny plastic beads. Same trapped air as the best insulator principle as sawdust, just industrialized. A sealed styrofoam box blocks hot air currents almost completely, and its white color reflects sunlight instead of absorbing it, unlike darker materials. It's lighter than sawdust, doesn't need washing afterward, and that's why fish vendors especially, who often travel longer distances, rely on styrofoam boxes today. Here's the detail almost nobody thinks about. Street vendors never use small ice cubes, like the ones from your freezer. They use one giant block, the full 25-kilogram slab. That's not random. It's math. A single large block has way less surface area exposed to hot air relative to its total mass, compared to the same amount of ice broken into hundreds of small cubes. Break that block into cubes, and their combined surface area skyrockets, meaning way more surface for hot air to attack at once. Less exposed surface equals slower melting. It's the same reason a large block sitting alone in the shade, with zero sawdust, zero burlap, zero styrofoam, no help at all, can still last 2 to 5 hours depending on the heat. Meanwhile, the small ice cubes from your home freezer melt in about 5 minutes flat under the same conditions. That's exactly why vendors only break the block apart the moment they're actually using it, and keep the rest of it whole for as long as possible. So the next time you walk past a fish stall in the middle of August and wonder how that ice is surviving hour after hour of brutal heat, it's not luck, and it's definitely not magic. It's an ammonia-cooled factory process, a set of thermodynamics principles most people never study, and a handful of tricks passed down through generations of vendors who never needed a physics degree to figure out exactly how to beat the heat. That's one question down. Got something that's been bugging you at 3 a.m.? Drop it in the comments. Might be next episode. I'm StickHead. See you at 3 a.m.